The views and comments of the hosts and guests are not necessarily those of the station.
Hello, Philippines, and welcome to the World News Jam on DZRJ Radio and Radio Bandito TV. My name is LeCain. Welcome to our show. It is our new time slot here on Monday morning in beautiful Manila, Philippines. We talk about stories going on outside the Philippines so you can stay informed as what is going on around the world. This week, it's the start of a new year, and there's a lot that has already happened. So let's just get to it. So here we are in 2025. We made it again to another new year in this world. But I guess the question we have to ask ourselves is, what kind of world are we living in? Is it safe or is it dangerous? What is the most dangerous place on the earth right now anyway? Could it be Afghanistan, Iran, Yemen, maybe the Congo or Somalia, Honduras, where you have a 1 in 5 chance of getting murdered? I guess you could even say the Ukraine or Gaza. They're still at war, so they're going to be dangerous. Of course, what about the Philippines? When I talk to some people back home in the U.S., they're always like, isn't the Philippines where they kidnap you and cut off your head? Well, no. That's not what happens here in the Philippines much. But what about the U.S.? How really safe is the richest country with the most powerful military? How safe are you really in the U.S. in 2025? On New Year's Day at around 3 a.m. in one of the biggest party towns in the U.S., New Orleans, people were having a party. Drinking, yelling, screaming, trying to find someone to kiss to bring in the new year. But not everyone was so happy. A 42-year-old man visiting New Orleans from Texas, it seems, was not very happy. In fact, his plan for ringing in the new year was to kill as many people as he could. Now, since it's the U.S., you might think he had several military-style rifles that were retrofitted with devices to make them like machine guns. I think it's called bump stock. But this U.S. Army veteran used a different kind of weapon, a Ford F-150 pickup truck that he rented just 2 days before. He drove the pristine white pickup from Houston, Texas to New Orleans to spend his New Year's Eve there in New Orleans. He had originally planned to stay home and kill his whole family and his friends. However, realized he probably would not get as much news coverage by doing that. According to him, he wanted the headlines to focus on the war between the believers and the non-believers. Turns out this man from Texas, who was born in the U.S., was a U.S. citizen and a military veteran, was somehow obsessed with the militant group ISIS. Seems he had joined the group before the summer. Now, was he actually a member of ISIS or just in his own mind? Well, that's still to be determined. However, he did make some videos just before he put his New Year's Eve plan into action. In the videos, he stated that he was 100% inspired by ISIS. That he even carried an ISIS flag with him. So, at around 1 a.m. on New Year's Eve, this man, 𝗪tože, was caught on video camera setting coolers around a block from Bourbon Street, one of the most popular streets in New Orleans. It turns out that in those coolers were IED bombs set to explode via remote control. Now, while he was doing this, He's also recording videos explaining his plight. The last video coming at around 3:02 a.m., just minutes before his plan went into motion. At 3:16 a.m., you can see him driving down one of the main streets with people everywhere, then making a sharp turn toward Bourbon Street. He mowed the barricades down, which were there to keep cars out of the pedestrian area. From there, he plowed into people one by one. Witnesses said that people were flying through the air, and you could hear the screams as Jabbar went full speed down the sidewalk into the crowds of people. Another video shows about a dozen police officers all of a sudden rushing toward the scene. Eventually, after striking dozens of people, the truck crashed into a pole. The man jumped from the truck and began shooting at police. Of course, the police returned fire, killing the man where he stood. If you see the videos, it's like something out of a movie. Bodies just laying everywhere. You can see people crying and screaming. By 3:40 a.m., the whole area was packed with police cars. Witnesses say the police let them leave the area and they walked past people just laying dead in the street. Others bleeding, calling for help. In all, 14 innocent people lost their lives that night, while 35 people were badly injured. They were just celebrating New Year's Eve in the wrong place at the wrong time. Joe Biden, the president, made a statement about the attack and said, "I want you to know I grieve with you." He went on to say that he was briefed by the FBI and that the bombs the man planted were set to a detonator that were found in the truck, but none of those bombs had actually gone off. President-elect Trump also made a statement, but his was quite different. He quoted a Fox News report that the man had driven the truck over the Mexican border 2 days before the incident. This gave people the idea that the man in the truck was a foreigner that had crossed the border in order to kill Americans. This turned out to be completely untrue. But just 8 minutes after Fox made that announcement, Donald Trump issued a statement about criminals coming into the country, saying this was Biden's parting gift to Americans, migrant terrorists. He said this is what happens when you have open borders with weak, ineffective, and virtually non-existent leadership. With the Biden open borders policy, I said many times during rallies and elsewhere that radical Islamic terrorism and other forms of violent crime will become so bad in America that it will become hard to even imagine or believe. End quote. This started a huge series of tweets and statements from other right-wing allies of Trump. Later, Fox said that the truck it was talking about was the same truck. However, it was 2 months ago. It was at the border with a different driver, as it was a rental truck. Now, the FBI is currently saying that they believe that this man behind the wheel of that rental truck in New Orleans may have had some kind of help. He may not have acted alone. However, they are saying it's not connected to another incident which happened just hours later in Las Vegas in front of the Trump Hotel, in which another U.S. citizen and current military man blew himself up in a Tesla Cybertruck, which he had rented. Of course, this incident has all kinds of implications. It was in front of the Trump Hotel, and it was a Tesla vehicle from the company owned by Elon Musk. In this incident on New Year's Day, the man circled around the hotel before driving up to the front entrance. The truck bed full of gasoline and firework mortars, which is kind of ironic in itself, being that it was an electric vehicle. It actually turns out that Elon Musk provided authorities information about the driver from him using a Tesla charging station before the explosion. Now, Elon put out a post on X that the explosion from the truck was caused by a very large fireworks amount and a bomb, but is completely unrelated to the vehicle itself. Making sure that we know it's not his truck that just blew up by itself. But here again, the person who set the explosion was an American citizen and was in fact a Green Beret from the U.S. Army and was an avid supporter of Donald Trump. Turns out one of his jobs in the military was to dismantle a network of Taliban-aligned forces that had been detonating car bombs in and around Kabul, Afghanistan. His phone was later uncovered after the blast, and a letter was in there, and it read, "We are the United States of America, the best country to ever exist. But right now, we are terminally ill and headed toward collapse." Then a second letter found said that this was not a terrorist attack. It was a wake-up call. Americans only pay attention to spectacles and violence. What better way to get my point across than a stunt with fireworks and explosives? I need to cleanse my mind of the brothers I have lost and to relieve myself of the burden of the lives I took. Supposedly, it was not the blast that killed this man, even though he was in the truck. Actually, it had been a gun to his head just before the explosion, which injured 7 people and killed just one, the man in the truck. But it does make you think a bit about how safe you are living in the U.S. Both of these incidences were clearly acts of terrorism, however, not from the terrorists that we think of usually. Usually terrorists are from, the Middle East, wearing exploding vests and having masks and wear turbans. But that really isn't the more modern terrorists of 2025. Now, the terrorists are just regular guys down the street who've been trained by the U.S. military, the same group that is charged with keeping Americans safe. Just makes me wonder what was going through the minds of these two guys on the first day of the new year. It also makes me wonder, what is up for the U.S. in 2025? Is it going to stay the world's leader in everything? That it's the place where foreigners all want to move to? Or is it going to get itself on one of those lists of the most dangerous places you can go in the world? This is LeCain on the World News Jam on DZRJ Radio, talking about stories going on around the world. Well, all right. It's 2025. And if you thought that maybe Israel would ease up a bit on military strikes on the people of Gaza, well, you would be wrong. Just because it was New Year's Day didn't mean that people should stop being killed in Gaza. In fact, in the span of just 2 days last week, the Israeli army killed about 110 Palestinians. We still have to say around because, well, some of the Palestinians are just missing. Sometimes if someone is standing too close to where one of those missiles lands, they just disappear. So there's no body to actually count. All these months of working out a ceasefire agreement between Israel and Palestinians has come to this. And still, this massive surge in operations and casualties comes as the U.S. is pushing for some kind of resolution before Donald Trump takes over the White House. They believe that once Trump takes over, he will continue his promise to let Netanyahu does whatever he wants to the Palestinians. So many are questioning what incentive Israel has to even sign any ceasefire agreement at all. And what will Hamas ever agree to with Israel, who continues its onslaught of attacks in Gaza? The Israeli military said that it hit 40 Hamas gathering points as well as command and control centers. However, it said it's trying to reduce the risk of harming civilians. That's hard to swallow looking at the big numbers they keep putting up of the dead. Israel continues to say that Hamas purposely sets up civilians in populated areas such as schools and hospitals to shield themselves from attacks. And then Hamas says that they have never done that, and that Israel targets schools and hospitals in order to rid the world of Palestinians. Israel will tell people to leave the area and go to humanitarian camps for safety, and then they will bomb those camps where the Palestinians were just told to go. The issue on many people's minds are the videos that keep pouring out of Gaza. Many of the people killed last week are children. On this past Saturday at 2 a.m. in the morning, missiles rained down on these two houses that were completely destroyed. Inside those houses were just women and children, thinking they were in a safe zone. But Israel fired on them anyway. People in the area are saying, there's no missiles coming out of these houses, no military hardware. Why does Israel want to kill us? There are multiple stories just like this one from places that people escaped only to be bombed once they arrived in the place they were escaping to. Now, Hamas said in a statement this week that they were looking to reach some kind of agreement. Seems there are still some hostages still alive after 15 months of war. They released a video last Saturday of what appears to be a female Israeli soldier. She said that Israel needs to do more to secure the release of hostages, and that their lives were in danger because of the actions of the Israeli military in Gaza. Well, her family said that this doesn't even seem to be like their daughter, that the psychological distress is very evident. They're calling on the Israeli government and world leaders to do more to bring home the hostages. In response to the video, Netanyahu said they are doing everything they can to bring home the hostages, and that anyone who harms Israeli hostages will bear the full responsibility of their actions. Of course, this is part of the reason the hostages have not been released yet. It's still the most valuable bargaining chip that Hamas has. They know that the more Palestinians die, the more countries such as the U.S. will begin to lose faith in Israel. It's become very clear to the world that part of the reason of the 45,000 plus dead Palestinians is the U.S. They are partly responsible. In August, the U.S. approved a $20 billion sale of fighter jets and other military equipment to Israel. And just this week, the Biden administration has notified Congress of another $8 billion in arms to sell to Israel. This contains air-to-air missiles, Hellfire missiles, more artillery shells and bombs. The U.S. put out a statement that this is to deter aggression from Iran. But the question being, if this is to deter Iran, why are the Israelis using these weapons to kill civilians in the Gaza Strip? The U.S. is responsible for 69% of all arms that Israel uses, and this is just up until 2023. It's probably much higher percentage now. But the U.S. has shown that even if they don't have the stomach for what Israel is doing to the Palestinians, they still give them weapons. This past May, the U.S. finally paused a shipment of arms to Israel over the ground assault in Rafah, a place where the residents in Gaza were told to go to escape being killed, but then Israel attacked it anyway. But eventually, the Biden administration caved and sent the equipment anyway. Most likely, we will hear about another large-scale sale to Israel before Biden leaves office. He's in a difficult spot still. If he doesn't give the weapons to Israel, then he's accused of siding with Hamas. However, by giving the weapons, he knows innocent people are going to die. Meanwhile, Israeli soldiers have become targets around the world, not by Hamas operatives, but by governments. If you remember, the World Court issued an arrest warrant for Netanyahu for war crimes, including purposeful genocide. But this seems to be geared toward any Israeli that is currently fighting in Gaza. This week, an Israeli military person was vacationing in Brazil. Then, when they discovered They were about to be arrested for war crimes. They escaped Brazil in the dead of night following a complaint made by the Anti-Israel Foundation that there was an Israeli soldier in Brazil. The Brazilian Federation Court ordered police to investigate the soldier if he was responsible for war crimes. The opposition in Israel immediately jumped on this as a failure of Netanyahu to protect Israelis outside of the country. But it does show the division of some of the countries over the conflict going on in Israel right now. Leads me to believe that even if there is a ceasefire, how long could it even last? And does anyone really trust the Israelis at this point? Or Hamas at this point? Israel makes deals, then doesn't adhere to them. And who knows who's really in charge of Hamas right now? Neither side trusts the other as we slide into 2025, as the year has begun. Even on day one, some people in the fighting have nowhere to run, nowhere that is safe. According to statistics, 6% of the population of Gaza is now gone. Could 2025 be the year of peace in the Middle East? So far, in the first week, the answer is no. And this is Eric LeCain on the World News Jam on Radio Bandito TV right here in Manila. Well, what would 2025 be without some Trump news? Remember how Trump is the first candidate in the history of America to win the presidency and be a convicted felon. Now, we have talked about Trump's cases a lot on the show in the past. It seems at this time, well, just last year, that Trump was most assuredly going to jail. I mean, the charges were pretty major: sedition against the U.S., stealing top secret classified documents, trying to overthrow the election. But as we have seen, Trump has managed to find his way out of each one of these cases, especially with the help of the Supreme Court that shocked the world by saying that Trump is immune to prosecution just because he was president. Some people have said that the only way that Trump could stay out of jail was that he needed to win the presidency. That he could finally say, "I'm president. You can't prosecute me for anything." Well, it turns out that is almost true. Most of his cases were delayed for so long that once Trump is in power, he literally will be able to make them disappear. But there was one prosecution out of the state of New York, probably the most non-lethal one, as it was a state prosecution, not a federal case. It was the hush money case. Remember the one where Trump slept with the porn star and then paid her to keep quiet about it, but he very purposefully hid the payments, tried to pass them off as legal fees. Anyway, you can get 4 years in jail for doing this, and Trump was found guilty of 34 different counts. And there wasn't really any question of his guilt. His defense was that, well, everyone does it. And then later he was, well, I was the president before, so I'm immune from prosecution. However, this actually took place before he was president. Anyway, Trump was found guilty on all counts. However, he was not sentenced because his team argued that because the election was coming up, the sentencing should wait until after. So the judge agreed. So the election happened. It's done. So the judge was going to sentence Trump. But now his lawyer said, well, you can't sentence him now. He's going to be president. The judge was like, well, just because he's going to be president doesn't mean he's any different than anyone else found guilty. His lawyers argued that the entire verdict should be erased because the presidents are immune to prosecution. But the judge rejected this argument, saying that he's not president yet, and he wasn't president when he committed the crime. So, January 10th, Donald Trump, the president-elect in the U.S., will be sentenced in state court. So, is there any chance that the president could be in jail on his first day as president? And the answer is no. Trump will not be sentenced to any jail time. He rather will be sentenced to an unconditional discharge, which is less than a slap on the wrist. However, it will bring closure to the case and will allow Trump to appeal his conviction. Now, the sentence will be held virtually. This was the decision of the judge, so Trump's lawyers could not try to delay it because he is preparing to be president or something like that. Of course, the question I am asked all the time is, why was the sentencing delayed for so long anyway? Well, the main reason for that is that the same reason that all his cases were delayed. The Supreme Court made a judgment that Trump was immune from prosecution for all official acts as president. Then the question arises, what counts as an official act of a president? Turns out, none of his cases counted as official acts as president. Him trying to overturn the election was a personal act. Illegally taking secret documents from the White House was a personal act. Paying off a porn star and hiding the payments is also a personal act. But it took a long time to get past all those appeals and delays from Trump's lawyers. And now that we are past them, well, Trump will be president. Once Trump takes office, all he has to do is fire the prosecutor, which he said he will do on his very first day. But he can't fire a state prosecutor, and he can't wipe away all his civil cases, such as his guilty verdict in the case of the Trump Organization committing bank fraud or the rape case of 𝗪𝗓𝗄𝘀. He can't appeal those convictions, but he can't just make them disappear like the federal cases against him. In fact, just last week, Trump lost an appeal to have his rape case overturned. Trump challenged the guilty verdict and asked for a new trial based on the argument that two other women that accused him of rape were able to testify. But the appeals court was like, if the women were not allowed to testify, the result would have been the same. The case of 𝗪𝗓𝗄𝘀 was so strong that it did not warrant a new trial. This case, based on Carol's allegation that Trump raped her in a Bergdorf Goodman department store, Trump lost, and she was awarded $5 million. But later, she sued him after he said that he would have never had sex with her because she was not his type. And the only reason that she was suing him was to increase her sales of her book. Well, Trump lost that case, and Carol was awarded $83.3 million in damages, which is a pretty big sum. So Trump has vowed to appeal that decision. In fact, it looks like that case and all his other appeals will make it. So the Supreme Court will see that he has finally exhausted all of his appeals. So when the Supreme Court finally hears all these appeals, remember now, 3 of the people on the Supreme Court are Donald Trump's picks, and so far they have leaned his way on nearly every case that he has brought before them. And when he gets into the presidency, we will get a chance to see if the court is basically severed from the office of the president as it is supposed to be, or just another bunch of Republican cronies just there to do Trump's bidding. Because I'm telling you, as soon as Trump takes office, the immigration cases are going to come pouring into the Supreme Court. Trump has vowed to lock down the border and remove all foreigners not legally in the country. Even foreigners who were born legally in the country but parents are illegal will be removed. And then there's the case of work visas for foreigners. Trump wants to do away with all that. So as you can imagine, there are some major court battles coming soon, and many are already speculating as to how the Supreme Court is going to lean. Remember when Trump was president before, he referred to that court as his Supreme Court. This Supreme Court has gone through a lot of scrutiny over the past few years. Some of the conservative members have taken gifts from high-end political donors and have basically said, so what? We're the Supreme Court. There's no other court you can take this to. So, in any case, we will see what happens on January 10th at Trump's sentencing in the hush money case. And we will see what the Supreme Court will be like in 2025 with Trump as president. Will they stand for justice and law, or will they just collect their paychecks? But for now, we will wait to next week for Trump's sentencing, and we will all sit back and watch him get off easy. This is Eric LeCain on the World News Jam, talking about interesting stories going on around the world. Let's move over to some medical news. So, smoking causes cancer. You know how I know that? It says it right there on the package. In the Philippines, it even has a picture of what your lungs could look like after lung cancer. I mean, we all know cigarette smoking is bad for you. It gives you cancer. But what about drinking? I mean, enough alcohol can ruin your liver, but doesn't give you cancer, does it? These days, we live in a world where it seems like everything you put in your mouth, there's a study somewhere that it's actually bad for you, or that we need to cut down on red meat and eat more vegetables, exercise. I mean, honestly, for tens of thousands of years, most humans sat around all day, lived on red meat alone, no vegetables. And you know, we're all still here. But this past week, the U.S. Surgeon General made an announcement. And that guy doesn't make announcements unless there is something we need to know. This past Friday, he advised us that alcohol consumption can increase your chances of getting cancer. So there you go. Seems everything that makes you feel good gives you cancer. Now, he didn't actually say it would give you cancer, but he did say it would increase the chances of you getting it. But from reading this report, it seems that he is saying that he wants to dispel the notion that drinking alcohol is not harmless. If you're too old to remember, smoking used to be thought of as good for you. Now, it took a while for people to catch on that it's not. But as of now, no one is going to argue with you that having a cigarette is going to prolong your life. This is kind of what the Surgeon General is trying to do with alcohol. Get people to realize that drinking, no matter what amount, is not good for you. For instance, saying that a glass of wine a day will make you live longer, when actually it can cause other problems that we weren't aware of before. According to statistics in the U.S., where you can always find these kind of statistics, 100,000 people a year get cancer from drinking alcohol, and 20,000 of those people die. And here's some interesting statistics. 70% of all Americans drink alcohol of some kind, and many have no idea that it's bad for you or good for you. And in a 2019 study, only 45% of people believe that drinking could cause cancer. This latest report, which uses modern evidence, kills the notion that a glass of wine a day will make you live longer. But, I thought that a couple glasses of wine a day would raise your HDL cholesterol levels, which is associated with a lower risk of heart disease. Well, it turns out it also gives you a higher chance of oral or esophageal cancer, which kind of erases the lesser chances of heart disease. Now, we are not talking about 6 glasses of bourbon a day. That can obviously lead to premature death. It can pretty much clearly give you chronic diseases, increase your possibility of getting into a fatal accident, maybe add to social problems and stress. This is about those of us that have wine with dinner, or drink before you go to bed, or a couple of beers with the buds. There's always been this idea that those people tend to live longer than heavy drinkers or non-drinkers. But this report is saying that that is just not true. That the studies that show drinking is beneficial are based on flawed data. But the data that they have now shows that alcohol in any amount is not good for you and should have a warning label saying as such. Now, in many alcohol commercials, especially beer, there is some requirements that at the end of the commercial, it should say drink responsibly. But this is geared more toward drinking and driving. What the Surgeon General is wanting is a legal requirement for all bottles to have some kind of warning on the label, letting the public know that this substance can cause you cancer. That there is no evidence that drinking alcohol will make you live longer. Now, of course, just like back in the 60s when cigarette companies said that, well, those studies that say their products cause cancer are based on low-level distorted data. As of now, there are many critics of this report on alcohol, and as you might have guessed, those critics are alcohol companies. But if you look at the studies done and how they came to their conclusions, you start to see the argument of the Surgeon General. Looking at people used in these studies, people under 55 may have stopped drinking because of a medical issue. So the study, they are considered non-drinkers. However, their actual health was not factored in, only that they are non-drinkers. So even if the moderate drinker lived longer, it may have had nothing to do with the alcohol itself. It's the old idea that if you're looking for an answer before you start, you really can't be objective. Also, the fact that they are now able to see how studies turn out over longer periods of time. Studies like this cannot be done in a year or even 5 years. Now that they're able to look at spans of time in the 20 and 30-year spans, the data is much more clear now. You can almost see how the researchers' minds have started to change recently because they are able to see the overall picture, saying that moderate drinking poses minimal health risks and may even confer benefits have actually been true before, especially looking at short-term data, but after some time of looking at the blurry details, it's starting to come into focus. In fact, in 2023, the World Health Organization said that when it comes to alcohol consumption, there is no safe amount that does not affect your health. According to them, over half of the 3 million annual deaths linked to alcohol, more than half of them are due to non-communicable chronic diseases, including cancer. So, for 2025, should you start an alcohol-free lifestyle? The answer is maybe. Like I said, these days, everything is bad for you, according to some studies somewhere. But something like this from the Surgeon General is worth taking a look at. You know, my grandmother smoked 3 packs of cigarettes and drank a glass of liquor every single day. She lived to be 86. This is Eric LeCain on the World News Jam on DZRJ Radio. What the heck is going on in South Korea? We reported on the show previously on how the President Yoon Suk-yeol tried to enact martial law in the country. Well, it lasted all but 6 hours before the government overturned it. But it was very exciting for those 6 hours as the government officials tried to get into the Capitol in order to vote to stop martial law. Before it really got started, the military tried to stop them from entering the building, but they managed to sneak through a hole in the fence and vote the whole thing down. So Yoon was like, oh, okay, sometimes you get martial law, sometimes you don't. But Korean officials have not been so easygoing about this whole thing. In fact, they impeached him and then they put out a warrant for his arrest. But here's where things have gotten tricky in Korea. How do you arrest a president that doesn't want to be arrested? The answer is, you don't. Around 100 officers went to his house with a pending arrest warrant, and he refused to come out of the house. The president's security team linked arms together and would not let the officers pass. When they tried a different route, they were met with blocked cars. Also, more and more supporters of the president began to appear until the whole thing started to get out of hand, and it looked like things could escalate into violence. Eventually, the officers gave up and left. Now the area is filled with supporters and non-supporters, seeing who's going to back down first. This is the first time something like this has happened in South Korean parliament. The president has been impeached and suspended from office. However, he refuses to leave. During his criminal investigation, he would not even answer any questions, which has led him to be forcibly removed from office. But how are they actually going to force him out? Even if he is stripped of his power, he is still entitled to a security detail. These guys protecting him are taking their job very seriously, believing he needs protecting from his own country. Theoretically, they should be taking orders from the acting president, President 𝗡𝗲𝘄𝘀. But there is some confusion still as to who is their boss. Some experts believe that they are showing unconditional loyalty to the ex-president rather to the oath to protect the office itself. The chief of the office was appointed by the ex-president himself just a few months ago. The previous person in charge of the security is now the former defense minister who is behind the idea of martial law in the first place. Currently, he's being held pending a criminal investigation. So why doesn't the current president just order the military just to take him? Well, the current president is the actual finance minister who was moved into the acting president position when the parliament voted to impeach the prime minister's Han Duck-seo. So, how many presidents do they have to impeach in order to get one that will follow the government's wishes? South Korea is a bit of a stalemate right now, as half the country supports Yoon while the other half sees him as a criminal. So, who's really in charge now in South Korea? Right now, there's no concise agreement as to what should actually happen. The president needs to be held to account for his trying to impose martial law in the country. But what should that be? And how do you enforce it? Right now, thousands of people are camped out protecting the president. If the police were to force their way into his compound, for sure the crowds will respond, and most likely people are going to get hurt. The security people guarding the president are heavily armed. They could begin to arrest the security people, but how would that play out? There are many issues at play here. The president is also under investigation for corruption, which many speculate had a lot to do with why the president might have called martial law in the first place. If you remember, he said the reason for martial law was to keep the North Korean spies from taking over the government. So far, there has been no evidence that this was ever going to happen. But many in the country believe in this conspiracy theory. If you watch the video of the president's supporters that have vowed to fight for him, they believe they are fighting the North Koreans in order to save their country. The warrant for the president actually expires today, and right now no one really knows what's going to happen next. But the ex or current president knows that if he were to surrender, he will most assuredly end up in prison. In fact, his crimes, if they are proven, warrant the death penalty in South Korea. So the question is not so much when violence is going to happen, but it is going to happen. In any case, the trial of Yoon will begin on January 14th, whether they can arrest him or not. And what about North Korea? You know, they are watching this all play out. They finally put it on their news that South Korea is in political turmoil, calling it the puppet South Korea, saying that a detention warrant was issued for the president, paralyzing state affairs and further deepening social and political chaos. It has referred to South Korea as the puppet nation, of course, puppet of the United States, since, you know, they are close allies, which leads us to wonder what North Korea is going to try and how they're going to take advantage of this chaos in some way, and what would that be? This whole issue is based on the fact, whether true or not, that North Korea is the reason the president had to enact martial law in the first place. And a huge part of the population believes this. And if things could get any worse in South Korea, they had a massive plane crash last week. A flight out of Thailand headed for South Korea was forced to land without all its landing gear, basically doing a belly landing before sliding down the runway and crashing into a barrier. But what happened after it hit the barrier is something you don't even see in a movie. A massive fireball exploding. It's all on video. Of the 181 people on board, 179 did not survive the crash. Only 2 flight attendants survived the crash. The reason for the crash is still being investigated, but it seems the plane collided with a bird just before landing, and it asked to land in the opposite direction of what it was going. But as it came in for the landing, its landing gear did not come down, so it just dropped on the runway. It looked like a pretty good landing. Even experts said it was the best landing the plane could have ever made. However, at the end of the runway, there was a concrete wall. If that wall had not been there, the plane would have just gone off into the grass and eventually slowed down. But instead, it smashed into the wall and exploded. So the question was, why was there a concrete wall there in the first place? And here's where they could have actually made a very big mistake. The concrete housed a localizer that helps navigation of planes when they are landing. It's okay that the wall was there, and many airports have them. However, airports are required that those walls be fragile, that can break away easily. This wall stopped the plane in its tracks. Planes are not really designed to be sturdy. They are made very light so they can fly faster and maneuver easier. They are not designed to skid across a runway on their belly until they hit something, which is why those types of structures are designed to break away easily. If the wall had not been there or was built correctly, most likely no one would have lost their life on that day. Well, it turns out that the airport had an operating manual that stated that the concrete embankment was too close to the end of the runway. Another document recommended that the location of the equipment that was being housed by the wall, that it all be moved. But the question is, did the pilots know that the boundary at the edge of the runway was a hard structure? Did they think the plane was going to just plow right through the wall instead of stopping in a massive fireball, killing 179 people? The police in South Korea have raided the Muhan International Airport where the accident happened, as well as the office of the airline that operated that flight and the office of the regional aviation. This was a search and seizure operation to make sure all the documents related to the flight, the crash, and all the documents that could be related are taken into custody. Executives of the airline involved in the crash have been banned from leaving the country. The Korean government is having a whole lot of problems, but they are not going to let this disaster slide by. Someone is at fault. Many experts have already weighed in on the crash to say that the pilots did an excellent job of landing the plane. But if the black boxes, which have been recovered, show that those pilots had no idea that that concrete wall was not going to break away when they struck it, then someone is really going to need to lawyer up soon. This is LeCain on the World News Jam on DZRJ Radio and Radio Bandito TV, talking about stories going on around the world. I wanted to tell this story because I may not get another chance. I've been following it for quite a while because it's one of those stories in which it's hard to decide who's the villain and who's the hero. It's the story of 𝗪cie𝗿𝗱. She's the Indian nurse. She was very smart, very good student. So her church paid for her to go to nursing school, which she did very well. The problem was, after she graduated, she still had not completed her exams prior to going to nursing school, which precluded her from getting a job. So she looked for work in another country and got a job as a nurse in a government hospital in Yemen. After doing that for several years, she decided to open her own clinic. But in Yemen, you must have a sponsor in order to open a business. So she recruited 𝗪𝗪𝗀𝗋. He was a local owner of a textile shop. He was going to be her partner. She took the money that she and her husband had borrowed and opened a 14-bed facility. Now, after the civil war broke out in Yemen, she decided to stay there because all her money was invested in that business. However, her business partner, well, he turned out to be a big problem. He threatened her, took money from the facility, said he would beat her, told people she was his wife. So, he wouldn't get in trouble if he had to beat her. So he forged marriage papers. He also took her passport and travel documents, prevented her from contacting her parents. So she went to the police. But remember, this is Yemen. They are under Sharia rule. Women's accusations don't carry much weight there. So she tried to take matters into her own hands. She drugged him with a sedative, ketamine, so she could steal back her passport while he was all knocked out. The problem was, she gave him too much, and he died. Not knowing what to do, she told her friend, who was also a nurse. The friend had an idea. So she chopped up the body into little pieces and hid it in a water tank. Well, they were both arrested near the border of Saudi Arabia. She was charged with murder. At the trial, the whole thing was spoken in Arabic. Of course, 𝗪Ş, she couldn't understand what was going on. She was not allowed to have an interpreter. She was found guilty and sentenced to death. There was eventually another trial which had the same outcome. This happened in 2018. But in 2023, she was granted an appeal, which she also lost. There was only one way that she could get out of not being executed, and that's paying what is known as blood money to the family. There was an amount set at $40,000, which is a lot for her family to come up with, but they did. They paid half the money, but there was a problem. The money went to the tribal leaders for initiating the negotiations. The family claimed that they had not received anything from the girl's family, so they made a second installment. But after the second $20,000, which was supposed to go directly to the family, the president of the country approved her execution. Now, the family of the man is demanding their blood money. But it's hard to talk to them because it's not easy to get into Yemen. The execution is set for sometime in January. However, the actual date is unknown. It could be any time this month. The Indian government and several humanitarian groups are trying to find a way to get her released, but the clock is ticking. Now, I've left out a lot of details, but this is a story that I thought should be told. I just did a story on a Filipino released from an Indonesian prison last week who was also on death row. She managed to get herself back in the Philippines with the help of the president. I just hope this girl can be as lucky. Yeah, she did not mean to kill him, and she wasn't the one that chopped up the body and put it in a water tank. Yet she is set to be executed. In Yemen, it's all about how much you can pay for your life. How much is your life worth? Or really, how much can you pay? Anyway, I hope she can find a way to buy hers. And this is Eric LeCain on the World News Jam on DZRJ Radio and Radio Bandito TV, talking about stories going on around the world. Thank you so much for joining us this Monday morning. We'll see you again next week. So please, everyone, stay safe out there. We will see you then.
The views and comments of the hosts and guests are not necessarily those of the station.